Hey guys, Brandon here again for the NCO Level 1 education course. This is Module 2, Teaching the Squat. So what's a squat? It's a total body movement primarily targeting all musculature in the lower body as well as all torso stabilizers. It's a foundational movement pattern with immense carryover to activities occurring in both life and then tasks you'll need to execute as a soldier. Realistically, really what we're doing with the squat is looking to target lower body strength. So squat mechanics, it's important to note here, technical pillars of the squat are always going to look the same regardless of the individual. So whether you're tall, short, wide, skinny, the same thing should be occurring at the hip, knee, ankle, etc. for any person. So hip, knee, ankle, all those same things should be occurring in a squat. Now visually what it might look like from the side will be slightly different based on body size and body type, but the actions that are occurring should all be the same. So feet, starting at the bottom, feet should be about shoulder width apart. You can adjust to slightly wider or narrower stance based on the individual, but start about shoulder width and then go from there. Toes should be pointed slightly out based on leg length and mobility restrictions. So if you've got shorter legs or good mobility, maybe about 11 and 1. Longer legs with poor mobility, about 10 and 2. The most important thing though is going to be to maintain equal foot pressure through quote unquote the tripod. So that means the pad right here under the big toe, pad under the little toe, and pad right under the heel. You want to maintain contact through all three of those. We don't want to rock back onto the heel and lose contact here. So maintain good contact with all three, with those feet slightly wider than shoulder width, and toes maybe slightly out. Moving up, what should the knees be doing? First off, there's a lot of common misconceptions sometimes that the knees shouldn't go past the toes. That's not true. Knees can and they should go over or past the toes. Now, they shouldn't necessarily go way out wide. We want them in line with maybe the middle three toes, so second, third, fourth toe, or second and third toe, kind of middle of the foot there. But knee position is primarily going to be a function of what's occurring at the foot and the hips. You see here, if my feet are turned way out, the knees have to track super wide, and it's a much more vertical shin. This would be a little bit better, more athletic, what we're looking for. Or here, feet are kind of turned in and narrow, or not turned in, but are too narrow, which means the hips can't sit as deeply. So the knees are driving out wide, trying to make room for the hips. Whereas you see here, feet a little wider, knees are now in line with the foot rather than driving outside it, and hips can sink down inside. Moving up to the hips, we want to find a neutral pelvic position. So if you remember from that first presentation, we talked about avoiding excessive anterior pelvic tilt or excessive arch at the top. We want to be nice and neutral. And then at the bottom, we want to avoid having this pelvis tuck underneath and going into posterior tilt. So find nice neutral, and then from the top, the hips should bend at the same rate as the knees, causing the center of mass to drop. So hips and knees should bend at the same time. It shouldn't be hips back, then down, or knees down, then hips back. Should be together. So just torso spine, moving up from the hips now. We want to maintain a nice straight line from your hips all the way through to your shoulders, even the head. So that's this nice middle picture here. Again, notice there may be a slight bit of arch in that low back, okay, or slight anterior tilt. That's okay. That's natural. That's all right to have happen. What we don't want is this where there's excessive arch, especially further up into the upper spine, and then you can see Andrew's head is arched way up and back. We don't want this to happen. Nice neutral head, so eyes looking straight ahead. Mostly neutral spine to maybe just a very slight arch or anterior tilt. And then definitely we don't want this one. This actually hurt Andrew just to film this, even with a very relatively light kettlebell here. This did not feel good. So we really want to avoid this rounding. If anything, a little bit of extra arch is okay, but any rounding we really want to get out of immediately because this is just a recipe for spinal injury. In this position, you want to generate some good pressure or tension in the torso by bracing as if you're going to get punched in the stomach. it's not a max effort punch. It would be like if someone was just going to really a light jab and you kind of just gently, quickly real braced. That's what we're looking for. It's not a super hard squeeze down, squeeze as hard as you can, flex. It's not that. It's just a light brace in case someone was going to tap you in the stomach. You should feel that tension throughout your abdominals, your low back, and then your obliques, which is the side here of your torso. So kind of summing everything up, foot position and neutral spine. So feet about shoulder width, maybe slightly turned out. Get a nice neutral spine. Inhale at the top, create that good torso brace. As we descend, knees and hips are bending at the same rate. Knees are tracking over the middle 3 toes. We want to maintain a nice rigid torso, not bending forward, not arching back. And then we want to control all the way down. So we're not coming down and bouncing out of the bottom. We don't want to see that. It should be nice, smooth control. And then as we stand up, knees and hips start to extend now at the same rate. Knees should not shoot back. They shouldn't extend back like this and then the hips come up. That's not what we're looking for. That's going to put a lot of pressure on the low back. And then make sure that we hold that brace all the way through the midpoint and ideally all the way through the finish as well. So moving on here, this is a squat continuum. This is kind of a list of progressions or regressions that's going to provide an easy way for yourselves to accommodate soldiers with different training ages or movement competencies. Training age is just a fancy way of saying how long somebody has experience training or working out. If I haven't been working out for very long, I might only have a year or 2 of experience. If I've been training since I was 18 and I'm 30 now, I've got 12 years. My training age is 12. So everybody's training age is a little different. So this allows you to have a good menu of items to pick from if somebody needs to utilize a different variation than a different soldier. And the way that you might approach this is the scale here goes from left to right, but they advance based on complexity and intensity. So intensity means the level of weight that they can be loaded with. And then complexity just means as I move up the chain, things get a little more complex. So we would want to learn with the easiest version, body weight squat first. Then we go to goblet squat, landmine squat, then Zercher squat, freehand, and then back. Okay, I wouldn't want to start somebody here if they've never learned how to squat or if they've got bad squat technique. I want to make sure that they can squat well first, then we start to load them up. I want to point out this doesn't mean that back squat is better than goblet squat or anything in between or vice versa. It's just a continuum saying this is less complex and usually loaded with a little less weight than this. Doesn't mean that this is better than this. And then lastly, none of these is truly essential or better than another one, kind of like what I just said. It's about making sure that you pick the variation that's best for your soldiers. The best way to describe this is if you're coaching me and we're doing Zercher squats and everybody else in the squad looks great, but I just look based on those technical pillars we talked about before, I don't look super hot or it looks like I could work on a couple things. You might, as the squad leader, take me back to, let's say, landmine squat and have me work on improving my technique, doing something that's a little bit less complex or maybe even a little bit lighter that allows me to practice my technique a little more. And then once my technique looks better, then you bring me back up to here and have me try it again here, and hopefully it's now improved. So that's kind of how you would use the continuum. So first up on that continuum, obviously body weight squat we covered with the technique slides, but would be goblet squat here. So squat technique's the same. I won't necessarily cover too much of that, but for our goblet position, you're going to hold a kettlebell or dumbbell in front of your chest directly underneath the chin. You want to keep those shoulders kind of retracted or pulled back just a little bit. So kind of trying to pinch the middle of your back and create a nice shelf here to hold nice and tight to the body with the weight. The one thing we want to avoid is letting that weight drop lower or fall forward, because if that happens, shoulders will round forward, and then that's where we get into, from a couple slides back, that rounded back posture as we're trying to hold that weight as it drops in front of us. So keep it nice and tall and kind of shoulders pulled back, so it's just a good shelf for that weight to sit in your hands. Moving up continuing now to landmine squat. This is going to be slightly more complex than goblet. not by a whole lot, and then you'll be able to load it a little bit more again, so it's just slightly more intense. But basically, to pick it up, most important thing, stand over the barbell and either squat down or hinge down to pick it up, and then bring it up. So it's going to sit, you see here, the barbell will sit in the same position as the goblet. It's just now a barbell instead of a kettlebell or dumbbell. Still have those shoulder blades pulled back so you have a nice shelf. One thing you'll note with this that you wouldn't have with a goblet squat is because it's a bar, as it comes down, it's going to push you backwards just slightly. That's okay. You may need to back your feet up a little bit to make sure that you're not getting pushed over, because you still want to be able to maintain those nice flat grounded feet. So by moving your feet back a little bit so you're in a good position at the bottom, that means you might, as you can see Andrew here, be slightly leaned into the bar at the top. That's okay. As long as at the bottom, if I were to take that bar out of your hands, you wouldn't fall forward. That means you're in a good position. Moving up to Zercher squat here. This is Justin, one of the other strength coaches in a different battalion. But Zercher position, that just describes where we're holding the bar. So that means bar is going to sit in the crease of the elbows, as you can see here. Shoulder blades are still pulled back and shoulder blades retracted nice and tight. Just like with the goblet and landmine squat. We want to have a nice strong brace with the core and mid upper back to hold that weight and not let it pull us into a bad position. If you need necessary, Justin's not doing it in this video, but you could interlock your hands for added stability if you feel like having two individual here is not quite as stable. And then elbow position should be roughly shoulder width apart. He doesn't want his hands super far inside. He doesn't want them super far outside. Right in kind of line with the shoulders is a good spot. And then one other thing that I'm going to use this video to show is Justin is clearly much taller and has much longer legs, especially an upper leg, his femur, than Andrew. So you'll notice, even though they're both executing the same technical aspects of the squat the same, it looks much different. Justin's feet are much wider and turned out much further. You can see better here than Andrew. Neither one of them is incorrectly squatting. They're both doing it well. It's just that Justin looks different because of his body anthropometrics or body portions. Hands-free front squat. So we have this one in here in place of front squat, because with front squat we get into, some people it doesn't feel great on their wrists, or it's like, what position do I hold the bar in, whether my fingers are under it, whether my hands are kind of tucked over the top. So with the freehand version we just take that completely out of it. The rack position is pull those shoulder blades, again, retract them towards your back a little bit, bring the arms straight up to shoulder height. There should be a nice shelf behind in the crevice of your shoulder here, between your shoulder blade and kind of the deltoid, which is your front shoulder muscle there. It should sit there nice and smooth. It shouldn't move, as you see in this picture here or video here with Andrew. If you have a soldier where the bar is rolling forward, they're either not keeping their arms high enough or they're leaning forward too far as they squat. So it's a really easy feedback mechanism. If the bar is rolling off the front, something's wrong. You can stand on the side and oftentimes see what's going on. And you want to maintain, again, that nice stacked rib cage and hip position, that neutral spine all the way through. And then lastly, a lot of times what you'll see too is the bar may roll off because the weight's too heavy, because as soon as the weight's too heavy, he's going to try to lean forward further to get a little bit more leverage on the bar, and that bar is going to roll right off. So this is a great variation, again, to make sure that we're squatting correctly and then to make sure that we're not using too much weight. So back squat here. This is going to change a little bit about what's happening at the shoulders now, because this is the first one where we're moving the weight from the front to the back. So now we're going to try to create a shelf between the top of our shoulder blades and our traps. So you're really squeezing those shoulder blades together, creating a good spot for that bar to sit on the back. You want to, when we're doing that though, I don't want to have my wrists kind of weakly underneath with a couple fingers on the bar. You want to get those knuckles on top of the barbell and then actively pull that bar down into yourself. So engage the lats, same muscles you'd use for a pull-up. Really pull down, create good tension so that that bar is securely sitting on top of us, rather than having my wrists underneath and just having like two fingers on the bar and look like I'm kind of almost running away from the bar. You want to be firmly engaged from the bar all the way down through that upper back. You can adjust your grip width based on shoulder mobility and comfort. So those with great mobility can have hands a lot closer than those with not as great mobility. And then one thing to note is your torso will have a greater forward lean in a back loaded position than in a front loaded position. So some common technical issues and how to fix them. So first up, if you see poor depth or range of motion, this can be caused by poor ankle dorsiflexion, inexperience with the squat pattern, or some tight hips, poor pelvic positioning. So as you can see in the video here, a really easy fix is just elevate the heels onto something to make it a little bit easier to either hit depth. If I've got bad ankles, this allows me to have a little more range of motion a little bit easier. Or if I have inexperience with the pattern, a lot of times that this can just make it easier to get down while keeping my upper back or my torso upright. This can be either a short or long-term solution. So if I'm just learning the movement, you might use this for a little while and then take it away and see if I'm able to squat more correctly now from the ground. Or if it's somebody that's dealing with a mobility issue, you can just simply have them always squat with their heels elevated slightly. It doesn't mean they're doing an inferior version of the movement or, you know, like, oh, that's not a real squat, bro. It has nothing to do with that. It's just simply allowing them to get into a better, safer position easier, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then lastly, you can do this for any squat variation. It doesn't have to be a particular type. It's not like, oh, once I get to barbell, I can't do this. You can use this for any variant. Knees collapsing or caving inward. So remember, we want those knees tracking in line with those middle 2 to 3 toes. We don't want them driving too wide, and we definitely don't want them caving in here. This is really not good. We're going to put a little bit too much stress on the internal structures of the knee if we're really caving inward. This can be caused by improper setup, feet being too wide, toes turned out too far, or poor body awareness. That's where we see this version a lot. Or if the weight is too heavy, you might see this version a lot. So if it's a new soldier and you're seeing this, make sure you correct them cue-wise on having those knees drive over the middle 3 toes. If it's somebody that's been here or been with you a while and you're seeing this, check how much weight they're doing. It might simply just be too heavy. Have them strip weight so they can do it correctly. That's the most important quality, is correct movement. Hips rising first. So in this particular picture here, you'll see this, but this can be caused by too heavy of a load, poor bracing throughout the torso, or uneven push through the foot. So this picture on the left, first off, we notice his shins are actually a little bit more vertical than we'd like to see. Remember, we want to let those toes come out, or the knees come out over the toes. So ideally, we'd have his knees a little bit further forward, and that would allow his torso to be a little bit more upright. But from here, notice the first thing to come up is his hips. And now all this weight is going to sit through the lower back here. And then as well, his weight is shifted into the back third of his back half of his foot rather than being out on the toes. If you were there in person, you'd probably notice that you could probably see some weight shift off the front of the foot here. Remember, we want weight on the whole foot, not just the back. So to fix this, lighten the load. Add a brief pause in the bottom to make sure that your soldiers have a really good control of that weight and they're not just dive bombing to the bottom and trying to bounce out. And then make sure, again, they're pushing through the whole foot. Butt wink here. You'll notice butt wink is this one on the left, where as we get to the bottom, the hips tuck under into posterior tilt. We don't want to have this happen. We want to keep that nice neutral spine all the way down. So this can happen either with squatting too low if I don't have great mobility or flexibility, or I have a problem controlling pelvic position. So if it's inability to control pelvic position, you're probably going to see that when you're first teaching somebody. Really just try to coach them as best you can into maintaining nice neutral position throughout the movement here. In terms of if you see this at the bottom, so if you're seeing this right at the bottom of their movement and that's the only place that this is occurring, it's probably just going too low for that individual. So just reduce their range of motion a little bit and have them, this part here, just have them squat not quite as deep and have them stop just before this starts to happen. And then make sure you reinforce that bracing. If you're seeing this particular action happen from like halfway down, almost as soon as they start their squat, then it starts happening. That might be a mobility or flexibility restriction. I'm sorry, or an inability to control pelvic position. So that's where you're going to want to go back to making sure they can move with a neutral pelvis, take any weight off, and go back to kind of one of those easier or less complex exercises on the continuum. So exiting double leg squatting here, we just got a quick slide here on what is a split squat. So again, another foundational movement pattern with immense carryover to activities occurring in both life and tasks you'll need to execute as a soldier. The key thing to keep in mind here is it's not any more inferior than a squat or anything like that. In fact, this may be more applicable to some of the things you as a soldier have to do, taking a knee with a ruck, kind of getting down on one knee to help pick something up. So it's just another way to train the lower body strength. It also happens to be a really good variant for people that have had a history of some back issues, because you can see here, everything is nice and stacked right on top of one another. There's no leaning forward or twisting, anything like that. It's just nice and straight line. It allows the spine to really handle loads much better without getting as aggravated. Technique for it, keep those front foot toes straight ahead. Back foot toes should be dug into the ground. Heel shouldn't be down, should be up on the toes grabbing the floor. Front knee positioned over the middle toe as we go down, just like with the squat, or even out over the front. Neutral pelvis and rib cage, head facing forward. So to kind of summarize, squatting is a foundational movement pattern, a prerequisite to more complex exercises and movements. Once we squat well, we can move to fancier stuff, but if we don't squat well, we can't. There may be small differences between individuals when it comes to like visuals, but technique-wise, they should be doing the same basic principles no matter what. It just like, remember that's Andrew versus Justin. They look different, but they're both doing the same things. Certain variations of the squat are more beneficial for teaching the proper patterning before looking to advance stuff. So those that bodyweight squat, goblet squat, maybe a landmine squat, they're a much easier option to teach with before you get into some of the more advanced or complex ones. Doesn't make them inferior versions, just makes them a better teaching tool. And then we showed some common technical errors that you're going to come across. There may be further errors that you're going to see. Do your best to correct them, but if you come across something that you're not sure how to fix, please feel free to come see Andrew or myself, and we'd be more than happy to help you out on how to fix that. And then lastly, if a static movement position can't be achieved and maintained, it shouldn't be loaded. So simply, if you can't have somebody body weight squat really well, don't start adding load to that. Make sure their body weight squat looks good. They're able to do that with good form. Once that happens, then start loading them up, goblet squat, landmine squat, etc. on up the continuum, but don't load them until it looks good. That's the end of Module 2. Next one will be hinge, which will be Module 3. Thanks, guys.